This morning, something changed. The feelings they worked so hard to ignore suddenly became impossible to deny. And for the first time, the truth hit them harder than they ever expected. They never imagined that one day they would wake up and find their thoughts completely consumed by you. That is the first truth you need to recognize. Most people spend years hiding from parts of themselves they are unwilling to face. They bury emotions deep beneath routines, distractions, and carefully maintained control, believing those feelings will eventually disappear on their own. But what was happening inside them was never as quiet as it seemed. On the surface, everything looked normal. They appeared composed, steady, and unaffected. Yet beneath that calm exterior, a silent struggle had already begun. You felt it too, didn't you? There was a subtle change, an unspoken shift in their energy, as though something important was moving beneath the surface long before either of you could fully explain it. This was never simply about distance or confusion. It went far deeper than that. It was about becoming aware of emotions they never intended to confront. When powerful feelings first appear, most people do not embrace them. They challenge them. They analyze them. They search for reasons to dismiss them. They hide behind pride, excuses, and emotional defenses built over years of self-protection. What they feel for you does not fit neatly into the version of themselves they have always tried to maintain. And that is where their real conflict began. The more these emotions threatened their sense of control, the harder they fought against them. This is similar to what psychologists like Freud described as repression, the mind's attempt to push away feelings that feel uncomfortable or difficult to accept. But repression does not erase emotions. It only stores them beneath the surface. Over time, that hidden pressure grows stronger. Eventually, no amount of resistance can keep it contained. What someone refuses to acknowledge today often becomes the force shaping their thoughts tomorrow, without them even realizing it. That is why this morning felt different. Nothing new suddenly appeared. Instead, something inside them finally cracked. You were not there to witness it, but a piece of their denial finally gave way. It was not a dramatic confession or an emotional outburst. It was quieter than that. It was the moment when every method they used to avoid their feelings stopped working. The distractions that once helped them escape suddenly lost their power. In that silence, you no longer appeared as a passing thought or distant memory. You became a realization they could no longer ignore. Attraction can be brushed aside, curiosity can fade, but genuine emotional significance behaves differently. The longer someone avoids it, the stronger it pushes back. Eventually, they were forced to face the question they had spent so much time avoiding. Why do you affect them this much? They searched for logical explanations. They told themselves it was temporary. They convinced themselves it was nothing more than timing, chemistry, circumstance, or coincidence. They accepted every explanation except the one they feared most. The truth is simple. Nobody fights this hard against something that means nothing. People do not spend endless energy trying to suppress feelings that have no importance. Every attempt they made to push you away only made your presence more noticeable. Every distraction eventually failed. This is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that something real has taken root. They always wanted control over their emotions, their decisions, and their reactions. Then you entered their life and disrupted that certainty. You became the one thing they could not predict, the one feeling they could not organize neatly, the one presence they could not erase. What frightened them was not only you, it was what you awakened inside them. You stirred something that had been asleep for a very long time. And people rarely fear emotions themselves. What they fear is the possibility of becoming someone different because of those emotions. That is why they pulled away. That is why their behavior became inconsistent. Their energy felt uncertain, not because they cared too little, but because they cared more deeply than they knew how to process. Feelings of this magnitude demand a choice, and they were not ready to make one. Avoidance is often misunderstood. Many people assume it means a lack of desire. In reality, it can mean the opposite. Sometimes a feeling becomes so powerful that it creates internal conflict. Part of them wanted safety and logic. Another part kept bringing you back into focus. Again and again, during quiet moments, your presence returned. Instead of fading, your image became clearer. Instead of disappearing, it became harder to ignore. Denial survives through distance. Yet even distance failed to weaken what they felt. Once an emotion settles into the subconscious as something certain, it no longer waits for permission. It demands recognition. And that is exactly what happened this morning. Without warning, without comfort, and without any place left to hide, the truth arrived. Not loudly, but with undeniable force. It came like a silent wave, leaving them face to face with a reality they could no longer escape. Their defenses did not break because of pressure from the outside world. They gave way under the weight of everything they had been carrying within themselves. And strangely enough, that internal reckoning affected them far more than any direct conversation ever could. No dramatic words were spoken, no confession was made, yet the truth settled into their awareness with undeniable clarity. Once a person truly understands something at that level, it becomes incredibly difficult to return to ignorance. People can hide the truth from others. Sometimes they can even hide it from themselves. But when the mind finally accepts reality without resistance, it leaves a permanent mark. They know now. Not as a possibility, not as a suspicion, not as a passing thought. They know exactly what they feel. Yet knowing does not automatically bring relief. In fact, it often creates a new kind of turmoil. Because now they must face everything they spent so long avoiding. They have to ask themselves what these emotions mean, what changes they may require, how their future could be affected, and perhaps most importantly, what they risk losing if they continue pretending nothing is there. Feelings this powerful never remain frozen in place. They grow, they deepen, they demand movement. Right now, they are standing in the middle of that growing pressure, trying to maintain control while the ground beneath their certainty continues to shift. One part of them still wants to retreat into old habits and familiar defenses. One part still hopes that avoidance might somehow make everything disappear. But another part already knows that is no longer possible. That is what makes the struggle so exhausting. They are no longer resisting you. They are resisting the truth they have finally recognized. The mind searches for certainty. The heart searches for honesty. When those two forces begin pulling in opposite directions, people often become confused by their own actions. One day they seem withdrawn and distant. The next day they appear emotionally available. One moment they convince themselves they have moved on. The next moment they find their thoughts drifting back to you before the day has even fully started. That inconsistency is not always a game or a strategy. Sometimes it is simply the outward sign of an internal battle. A battle between emotion and logic, between desire and self-protection, between surrendering to what is real and clinging to what feels safe. Mornings have become especially difficult because silence leaves very few places to hide. When everything grows quiet, distractions lose their power. Responsibilities fade into the background. The noise disappears. And underneath all of it, the truth remains. No matter how many explanations they create, no matter how often they redirect their attention, no matter how strongly they insist they have let go, the feeling keeps returning. Not because they invite it back, but because it never truly left in the first place. What surprises them most is not how intense the feeling has become, it is how persistent it is. They assumed time would weaken it. They believed distance would dissolve it. They trusted logic to eventually overpower it. Instead, it survived every attempt to remove it. Quietly and steadily, it remained present through every distraction, every rationalization, and every denial, until the moment arrived when they could no longer pretend they were untouched by it. That realization changes everything, not because it instantly provides answers, but because denial no longer works. Once the illusion falls apart, it becomes impossible to see things exactly as before. The questions become louder, the emotions become sharper, the cost of avoidance becomes impossible to ignore. Now they find themselves wondering what comes next. Should they continue resisting? Should they finally acknowledge what they feel? Has remaining silent become more painful than speaking honestly? Those questions stay with them long after the morning passes, because the issue is no longer whether the feeling exists. That answer is already clear. The real question is what they will do with that truth. And that is where the deepest uncertainty begins. Discovering the truth is one challenge. Learning how to live with it is another. At this moment, they remain suspended between the comfort of familiar defenses and the undeniable reality their heart keeps revealing. The pressure continues to build. Their awareness continues to expand. And beneath every effort to regain control lies a realization they can no longer escape. Some emotions become too powerful to dismiss. Some connections become too meaningful to reduce to coincidence. And some truths, once fully recognized, continue echoing through every quiet morning, long after denial has finally disappeared. What makes this experience even more significant is that it was never only about you. In many ways, it was about the hidden parts of themselves that your presence awakened. You brought buried emotions into the light. You forced deeper questions into conscious awareness. And that inner transformation is still unfolding. They once believed that accepting their feelings would bring peace. They thought acknowledgement would calm the storm. Instead, the opposite happened. Giving the feeling a name did not weaken it. It made it real. And once something meaningful becomes real, it becomes far more difficult to escape. Awareness does not always lessen emotion. Sometimes it intensifies it. It transforms uncertainty into certainty and turns vague impressions into undeniable reality. That reality is now pressing against them from every direction. They can no longer convince themselves that nothing is happening. They can no longer rely on the hope that these emotions will simply fade with time. Now every thought carries greater weight. Every memory feels more significant. Every quiet moment reminds them of a truth they finally see clearly. And that truth is becoming impossible to ignore. Every memory now carries a deeper emotional weight than it once did. Even the quietest moments seem filled with an invisible tension they cannot escape. Once the mind can no longer deny something genuine, an internal division begins to form. One part of them is pulled toward you, while another part fights desperately to maintain distance. Neither side is willing to give up easily. This is not simple uncertainty. It is a real psychological struggle between longing and self-preservation. Both forces are active at the same time, and both continue growing stronger because what they feel has moved beyond surface-level attraction. It is slowly transforming into something far deeper, an emotional attachment. For someone who values independence and control, attachment can feel unsettling. It threatens routines, certainty, and the sense of self-reliance they have spent years protecting. What many people fail to realize is that the stronger an emotion becomes, the stronger the defenses against it often become as well. That is why recognizing their feelings did not immediately push them toward action. Instead, it caused them to stop and analyze everything. They began questioning details that once seemed effortless. They examined possibilities from every angle. Suddenly, situations that felt simple before started carrying emotional significance. Anything that matters deeply eventually feels risky. Risky to their freedom, risky to their identity, risky to the version of themselves they have carefully maintained for years. And people rarely fear things they do not value. That realization creates a contradiction they can no longer ignore. The very feeling drawing them closer is also encouraging them to step back. The same emotion inspiring hope is also awakening fear. As a result, a constant tension exists beneath the surface. That tension follows them everywhere. It shows up during ordinary moments that once passed unnoticed. A certain voice, a familiar expression, a brief silence during a conversation, a random memory triggered by something insignificant. Without warning, their attention returns to you. The subconscious mind holds on to meaningful connections far more strongly than the conscious mind realizes. It does not follow logic. It does not care about plans or intentions. At some point, you crossed an important boundary within their inner world. You stopped being a temporary thought. You stopped being someone they could easily set aside. Now they are left facing the question they have tried so hard to avoid. Why you? Why does your presence affect them differently than anyone else? Why does thinking about you create emotions they cannot fully explain? The harder they search for logical answers, the less logical everything feels. This connection was never built on convenience alone. It was never simply the result of timing or circumstances. It cannot be explained away with one reason or one event. It comes from something deeper, a sense of recognition, a feeling that seems both unexpected and impossible to escape. And if that feeling is real, then it asks something difficult from them. It asks for honesty. It asks for vulnerability. It asks for emotional openness. Most importantly, it asks for action. Those are the very things they have spent years avoiding. Because of that, they try to slow everything down. They create space. They postpone decisions. They search for reasons to wait a little longer. Deep down, they hope time will weaken what they feel. But genuine emotional bonds rarely disappear because of distance. In many cases, distance makes them stronger. When people are no longer distracted by daily noise, they are left alone with what is true. The unnecessary fades away, while what matters remains. That is exactly what is happening now. The truth keeps becoming louder. They feel it when thoughts of you appear unexpectedly. They feel it during emotional waves that arrive without warning. They feel it in the restlessness that refuses to settle, no matter how hard they try to regain control. Again and again, suppression fails. The tension continues growing because they are fully aware of their feelings while still trying to resist them. They recognize what is happening, yet they continue questioning it. They acknowledge its strength, yet hesitate to accept everything it requires. That creates a pressure that never fully disappears. Instead, it builds gradually over time until something eventually has to change. What makes this battle even more difficult is that it is no longer only about their feelings for you. It is about what those feelings reveal about themselves. Their emotions expose hidden desires they rarely acknowledge. They reveal a longing for genuine connection, a desire to be understood on a deeper level, and a wish to be seen without constantly hiding behind protective walls. At the same time, those feelings expose fears. The fear of becoming emotionally dependent, the fear of being affected too deeply, the fear of allowing another person to matter more than they intended, because being deeply affected requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires trust, and trust requires letting go of at least some control. That is the part that unsettles them most. It explains why they keep moving back and forth. One moment they feel drawn closer emotionally. The next moment they pull away and retreat into their thoughts. They are caught between what their heart wants and what their defenses still believe they need. And until those two sides reach some kind of agreement, the cycle of moving forward and pulling back is likely to continue. One moment they allow themselves to imagine what could happen if everything worked out. The next, they immediately convince themselves that the situation is too complicated, too uncertain, or too dangerous to pursue. This back-and-forth pattern is not accidental. It is a defense mechanism designed to protect them from becoming overwhelmed. By moving closer and then pulling away, they can experience the emotions in small doses without fully surrendering to them. But that strategy has limits. No one can remain halfway invested in something this meaningful forever. A person can postpone it, distract themselves from it, or find temporary ways to avoid it, but eventually, reality demands attention. And every delay comes with consequences. Emotions that remain buried do not simply disappear. They change form. They become inattention. They become restlessness. They create a constant mental background noise that follows a person throughout the day. Lately, that noise has grown louder. It is becoming harder for them to ignore, and it is no longer affecting only their emotions. It is beginning to influence the way they think, the habits they follow, their reactions, and even their overall state of well-being. Sometimes it shows up as difficulty concentrating. Sometimes it appears through sudden mood shifts. Other times it reveals itself when small situations trigger stronger emotional reactions than they normally would. The deeper cause remains the same. A truth they have not fully resolved is pushing its way to the surface. And that truth is asking for something they still hesitate to give. Not because they do not feel it, not because they do not understand it, but because accepting it completely requires courage. Still, the pressure continues to grow. Every attempt to push it aside only postpones the confrontation. Every effort to suppress it creates more resistance within. Every act of avoidance strengthens the tension underneath. That is why they are much closer to an emotional turning point than they realize. Not because they are falling apart, not because they are powerless, but because resisting something this significant requires an enormous amount of energy. And that energy is slowly being exhausted. Something inside them is beginning to shift. The emotional structure they built to contain these feelings is not as strong as it once seemed. The walls have not fully fallen, but they can feel the strain running through them. They sense the pressure building. They hear the quiet signals that something cannot continue as it has. A part of them already knows the truth. They know they cannot carry this contradiction forever. Sooner or later, a decision will have to be made. A decision between resistance and acceptance, between fear and honesty, between protecting old defenses and embracing a reality they can no longer deny. That awareness is what makes this period so intense. Deep down, they understand that something is changing. The emotions continue growing stronger, the clarity continues increasing, and the room available for denial continues shrinking. A transformation is taking place inside them right now. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. And often the quietest changes become the most powerful because they happen beneath the surface, where genuine understanding is formed. What they once rejected is becoming harder to dismiss. What they once questioned is becoming harder to doubt. What they once pushed into the shadows is slowly demanding to be acknowledged. The real change is not happening in the image they present to the world. Outwardly, they still appear composed. They continue following familiar routines. They continue acting as though everything remains under control. But underneath, something entirely different is happening. Their mind is gradually becoming tired of pretending. The truth no longer needs permission to exist. It no longer requires approval, justification, or validation. It simply is. And repression always carries a cost. The longer someone pushes away something authentic, the stronger its return tends to be. What once felt manageable now feels impossible to ignore. What once seemed distant now feels immediate. What once appeared uncertain now feels undeniably real. When emotions buried deep within the subconscious can no longer remain hidden, they do not return quietly. They surface unexpectedly. Their feelings reveal themselves in unexpected ways, through distraction, restlessness, and thoughts of you they cannot seem to escape. You are no longer just part of their outer world. You have become part of their inner reality. And that changes everything. Distance and distractions can only do so much because inner truths follow a person everywhere. The real question is no longer whether these feelings exist, but what they will do about them. And that truth has already begun transforming them from within, and perhaps that is the truth they can no longer escape. Some people enter your life as a passing chapter, but others awaken something so profound that they change you forever. No matter how long the resistance lasts, no matter how carefully the feelings are hidden, a genuine connection eventually demands to be acknowledged. And as they stand at this turning point, one reality grows clearer with each passing day. What they feel for you is no longer something they can outrun, deny, or leave behind. It has become a part of who they are, and sooner or later, their heart will ask them to choose between continuing to hide from the truth or finally embracing it.